It's 2 in the afternoon on Friday, September 12th, here in Korea, live from Seoul. I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. The story is making headlines at this hour. A day after the government announces plans to hike cigarette prices, a Seoul court opens a compensation hearing brought against the nation's biggest tobacco companies. The Bank of Korea keeps its key interest rate steady at 2.25% after cutting the rate last month, but pundits say another cut might be coming soon. And in the Middle East, after much discussion, 10 key Arab states commit to the U.S.-led effort to fight Islamic State militants. And we begin with the government's plan to raise the price of cigarettes. People are still divided on whether the measure will be effective in cutting the country's smoking rate. Some say it's merely a government attempt to rake in nearly $3 billion in tax revenue. Our Song Ji-sun has our top story.
More than half the current price of cigarettes goes to the government in the form of taxes. The latest hike proposal would up that percentage even more, by 10 percentage points. That's because a new tax category has been introduced towards cigarettes, the individual consumption tax, which would make up about 13% of the new price for a pack. The individual consumption tax is typically levied for luxury items like fur coats or casino entrance fees. But cigarettes are more commonly consumed by the public, and the changes are expected to place a burden on households with smokers. The cigarette price hike is expected to raise consumer prices by 0.6 percentage points. Under the assumption that consumer prices will rise by 3% each year, the Korea Institute of Public Finance says the price for a pack of cigarettes would be double what it is now in 5 years' time. By the year 2025, the price will be close to $6. It will also equal a windfall for tax revenue for the government. If the changes take effect, the government will rake in an estimated $2.7 billion in additional taxes. The question remains whether the measures will make it through the next few months, amid criticism that the price increase will have a greater effect on people in the low-income bracket. Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan has attempted to downplay those concerns by saying that the additional tax revenue will be funneled back toward improving the livelihoods of the public and enhancing the nation's safety and health infrastructure. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
And coincidentally, a compensation hearing is taking place today in Seoul, brought by a state-run health agency against the nation's large tobacco companies. Given the timing, all eyes are on how this $52 million lawsuit will unfold. Our Shin Se-min has more.
The trial of the National Health Insurance Service versus the nation's largest tobacco manufacturers begins this afternoon, one day after the government announced plans to nearly double cigarette prices starting next year. The public organization is seeking compensation from KT&G Corporation, Philip Morris Korea, and British American Tobacco Korea to recover medical costs incurred due to what the agency claims are tobacco-related disease such as lung cancer. The organization is confident they can prove the causal relationship between smoking and the illnesses using 19 years of medical records in its database. The agency says the data will prove that the occurrence of cancer in smokers is much higher than in non-smokers. It also aims to show that the tobacco companies violated laws in failing to fully explain the addictive and hazardous chemicals that are present in their products. The tobacco companies in defense are expected to argue that they can't be held responsible for the choices of individuals to smoke or not smoke, and that they have done what was legally required of them to warn the public about the dangers of smoking. It's a $52 million lawsuit that could open the floodgates for similar suits if the National Health Insurance Service wins. It would also signify a rare loss for Big Tobacco, which successfully defended itself earlier this year against 7 individual plaintiffs who were seeking compensation over claims that will resemble the ones in this trial. The public agency, however, feels that its case is much stronger. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
There were expectations that the nation's key interest rate may go down even further following last month's cut, but the Bank of Korea decided to keep it unchanged at 2.25%. However, our Hwang Ji-hye reports another rate cut may be coming sooner rather than later.
The Bank of Korea has chosen to take a wait-and-see approach to judge the impact of last month's rate cut. It decided to leave the key rate steady at 2.25% in September, following its monthly monetary policy meeting on Friday. Last month's rate cut, the first since May last year, came as the government unveiled a set of aggressive stimulus measures to boost growth. The government has been expressing concerns that the Korean economy might fall into Japan-style stagnation. Pundits say, however, that the bank could lower the rate once more before the year is out. They cite recent government pressure to join efforts aimed at boosting growth. Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan said earlier this week that the recovery is still feeble and an expansionary fiscal and monetary policy should support growth for a while. When asked about the European Central Bank's recent decision to cut its rate to a record low, Choi said the European Bank had taken a preemptive measure against global economic risks. He added that Korea is also easily swayed by global economic conditions. Choi's comments have raised concerns over the Bank of Korea's independence. The central bank governor has said, though, that the bank does not make decisions that stand opposed to its assessment of current economic conditions. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Korea's jobless rate, in the meantime, edged down 0.1 percentage point to 3.3% in August. This as the nation's manufacturing and service sectors finally picked up momentum after a sluggish start to the summer. The number of new jobs went up for the second straight month, with Statistics Korea saying the number of people in the workforce reached nearly 26 million in August. That's roughly 600,000 more than the same month last year. More positions opened up in the manufacturing, retail, and service fields, but job creation was down in the financial, agricultural, and fisheries sectors. In the year 2012 for Korea was at its record high.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul.
Shopping market thinks the true meaning of creation shines through. In the Middle East, 10 Arab nations pledged to join Washington's fight against Islamic State militants. Retired U.S. Marine General John Allen is said to be coordinating the efforts in Syria and Iraq. Our Kwon So-ah has this story.
President Obama's broad coalition of U.S. allies to counter Islamic State militants is gradually taking shape. 10 Arab nations, including Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Egypt, and Lebanon, have vowed to support the international coalition, which aims to ultimately destroy the extremist group. This pledge came on Thursday at a meeting of the nation's foreign ministers and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in the Saudi coastal city of Jeddah. Kerry stressed the critical role Arab nations play in the joint communique. They will have to provide military support, humanitarian aid, and ensure the flow of funds and foreign fighters to IS is cut off.
And certainly the effort to repudiate once and for all the dangerous, the offensive, the insulting distortion of Islam that ISIL propaganda attempts to spread throughout the region and the world.
Kerry also dismissed Russia's questioning of the legality of the coalition without prior UN Security Council authorization. He said that if the situation wasn't so serious in Ukraine, it would be amusing to think about Moscow raising the issue of international law. Washington's European allies have been offering their own forms of support. Germany says it's happy to provide weapons and ammunition. Britain and France have not ruled out joining U.S.-led military action in Iraq, but are wary about joining potential operations against IS positions in Syria. Here in Korea, Seoul's foreign ministry reiterated Thursday that an aid package worth $1.2 million will be sent to help Iraqis displaced by the crisis. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
In other news, after 6 months of dramatic testimony, the verdict is in. Olympic and Paralympic track star Oscar Pistorius has been cleared of all murder charges over the killing of his girlfriend, model Riva Steenkamp. The double amputee who admitted to shooting her through a bathroom door on Valentine's Day last year said he had mistaken her as an intruder. The presiding judge in the case says prosecutors failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Pistorius was guilty of premeditated murder. The former Olympian, however, could still be convicted of culpable homicide or manslaughter when sentencing resumes on Friday. And shifting our focus back to Northeast Asia, a senior North Korean diplomat reportedly held talks with Europe's chief envoy on human rights. Citing an official from the European Union, Radio Free Asia reports that Kang Sok-ju, Pyongyang's Secretary for International Affairs, met with Stavros Lambrinidis, the EU Special Representative for Human Rights, sometime this week. During the talks, Lambrinidis reportedly expressed grave concerns about North Korea's dire human rights situation. Kang is currently on a 5-nation tour that includes stops in Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, Italy, and Mongolia. Now, Lambrinidis is said to be the only EU official to have met with Kang. A high-level three-way meeting between officials from Korea, China, and Japan took place for the first time in 10 months on Thursday here in Seoul. As our Hwang Sung-hee reports, the three neighbors agreed to improve relations strained over historical and territorial disputes.
Amid deepening diplomatic friction, senior officials from Korea, China, and Japan met in Seoul Thursday, seeking fresh momentum in their trilateral cooperation. Divided over historical and territorial issues, the three neighbors have not held a summit since last year and met today at Korea's request.
The Republic of Korea has made strenuous efforts to resolve such a situation, either by hosting related meetings or by suggesting various constructive alternatives, with a sense of duty to continue working toward keeping and reinforcing trilateral cooperation.
The three countries have expanded exchanges in areas such as economy, trade, and culture over the past 15 years, but regional rows are hampering further growth.
At the same time, our cooperation has seen difficulties and setbacks, which affected the general atmosphere of the trilateral cooperation.
Each country's chief diplomat agreed the next trilateral meeting should be conducted at a higher level to secure further progress in their cooperation.
We did have a meeting in mind that this must be followed up by the political level for the ministers and ultimately the supreme leaders.
But despite their agreement on this, the three officials failed to shake hands on when, where, and how the much-delayed summit will take place. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Now here's an interesting study for those who want to conquer the world of math. A U.S. study says the simpler the words for numbers are, the more it helps younger children study the subject. In other words, it's easier to master math if you learn it in Korean, Chinese, Japanese, or Turkish. For instance, there are just 10 words used for numbers in Korean or Japanese, while English has over 24. The issue becomes most apparent starting with the number 11, according to the researchers. While the Korean and Chinese languages have words that translate into 10, 1 to express the number 11, English has a separate name altogether. Now, although this may seem like a minor issue, the researchers say these additional mental steps can lead to more errors when solving problems. So it may be easier to study math in the Korean language, but Korean students often leap at the chance to study overseas, in large part to make themselves more appealing in the globalized world we live in. But our Connie Kim says the global education they seek may be right under their noses.
Get all the benefits of studying abroad without ever having to leave Korea. 2 additional foreign universities have opened at the Incheon Global Campus in Korea's western port city. It's part of the Incheon Free Economic Zone's plan to house competitive universities from around the world.
Utah University and Belgium's Ghent University began classes earlier this month. They joined State University of New York and George Mason University. Studying the same curriculum, receiving the same diploma, and having the opportunity to study at their foreign university's main campus for one school year is what's luring an increasing number of Korean students.
It's a unique experience where students get to interact with exchange students from the main campus, and we're able to study with actual professors from the main campus that are actually well experienced and very knowledgeable.
The strategy came about in part because Seoul sends more students to the U.S. than any other city in the world. Data shows more than 56,000 students from the Korean capital went to the U.S. to study for degrees between 2008 and 2013. But will the Incheon Global Campus be able to stem the flow of young Korean talent leaving the country for their further education?
The Seoul Global Campus offers students a diverse set of unique experiences, but pundits say it still has a number of challenges to address before it can ascend the ranks among would-be college students.
In order to retain talented Korean students, the key is to bring in universities with high name value. As of now, not many of the schools in Songdo are world-class universities. It's also important to balance out the proportion of foreign and local students.
The Incheon Global Campus wants to increase the number of global universities from 4 to 10 by 2025. School officials say their future success will ultimately depend on the quality of institutions they're able to attract. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
While local audiences are getting a taste of the major Chuseok films released last week, international audiences are getting a taste of the latest Korean movies at the Toronto International Film Festival. And for more, we have our film critic and journalist Pierce Conran in the studio. Welcome back, Pierce.
Pleasure to be back. Thank you.
All right, so you were telling me that there's a stage, the festival is staging a special program called the City to City Seoul program. And were Korean movies generally given this big of a part in the event in the past?
Well, this is certainly a special year for Korean film at the Toronto Film Festival. Now, in recent years, well, Toronto's always been quite big, but in recent years it's become an especially significant event. Some would say that it's the biggest film festival in the world, although most people will still say that's Cannes, because there's this kind of trifecta of major film festivals in Europe, which include, of course, Cannes, Berlin, and Venice. And while Toronto is probably more significant than Berlin and Venice these days, but kind of between Cannes and Toronto, it's a little different, but there's an issue of prestige. The thing about Toronto is that most of the films that will end up competing in the Oscar season, they get their debuts at Toronto. Some do at Venice as well, because we're kind of at the same time. But yeah, Korean films have screened over the years at Toronto many times. But this year is very special because they have this city-to-city Seoul focus. So there's far more Korean films, and even though this is a very much a festival for Oscar films, it's also a huge grounds for discovery for other films that'll kind of go around the film festival circuit over the next months.
So to tell us more about the program, is it the organizers pick one city per year?
That's correct. So the city-to-city focus, the purpose is to highlight the cinema of a specific nation. Now they say it's a city-to-city focus and that it's Seoul, but really most of the films that take part in this program are actually in other parts of Korea. So it's really just about Korean cinema rather than just Seoul. But so this is indeed quite special for Korean films to have this kind of a major berth, because there's also Korean films in other sections of the festival. So in total, there's actually 14 films this year.
Oh, okay. And the films that are in the program, the City to City program, are they newly released films or?
Well, it's kind of a mix. There's a few world premieres, but starting with some of the films that have already been around a little bit. I already mentioned Cannes. Two of the films in the section debuted at Cannes back in May. Those are A Girl at My Door, which is the kind of a indie-ish drama with Bae-duna and Kim Se-ro and Song Se-byuk. And this is produced by Lee Chang-dong. It's directed by a new director called July Jung. And this is a really terrific film that went down very well at Cannes. And joining it is A Hard Day, which was very popular here in Korea. And that stars Lee Sung-yoon and Cho Jin-woong. It's kind of a kind of action thriller with a real kind of a black humor about it. That really went down a treat at Cannes. It's a very fun, kind of jazzy action thriller, and that's sure to do well in Toronto. Beyond that, from Berlin, there was A Dream of Iron, which is this very austere documentary about POSCO, which is the steel working plant, yes, in Pohang. And then there's also from Locarno, another big festival in Switzerland, there's some more art house stuff like Alive, which is the new film by Park Jong-bom, which debuted at Jeonju, and then Gyeongju, which stars Park Hae-il, and that's the new Jang Ryul film. So a lot, the stuff that has already premiered.
So out of those, what would you recommend the most?
Well, I'm very partial to both of the films at Cannes. There's a reason they went to Cannes. They're very good. I mean, A Hard Day is really just kind of a terrific genre cinema. It's so fun. It's very tight. There's no flab in it where you might have sometimes of Korean thrillers. There's not really any melodrama. It's snappy. It's fun. It's always surprising. And it's quite innovative in its way. A Girl at My Door is quite similar to other Lee Chang-dong films, which is a very flattering comparison. And it's a very, I mean, there's a lot going on. You could call it dense, but it doesn't feel that way. And the performances are amazing. It looks incredible, and there's a lot you can think about if you choose to kind of let yourself go into it that way. So I'm very keen on those. I also really like Alive, but that's a very difficult film. It's very bleak. It's 3 hours long. It's not for everyone.
It's more like a documentary, would you say?
I wouldn't call it a documentary, but maybe cinema verite. There's it's kind of social realism. It's really good, but I can't just recommend it to everyone.
You really have to love the movie to love the movie.
You have to be comfortable sitting for 3 hours in a dark theater for a dark movie.
And what about other movies? You didn't really like the rest of the movies that were
actually, the thing about this program is once I saw the lineup and once I saw the films particularly, I had to kind of say, you know, hats off to the programmers. It's a great lineup. The 8 films that are in the City to City Seoul focus are really, really good.
Okay. And the films that you did, like you mentioned, the Scarlet Innocents?
Oh, so these are the films that haven't screened yet. So there are some new films that are having their world premieres there. And those are, Scarlet Innocents, which is the new film starring Jung Woo-sung, who of course was recently in The Divine Move. And actually his film from last year, Cold Eyes, was also at the Toronto Film Festival as a gala presentation. This is a film, again, that I really enjoyed. It's directed by Im Pil-sung, who's kind of this incredible visual stylist who made the films Antarctic Journal and Hansel and Gretel. So it's been 7 years since he made a feature, though he was involved with Doomsday Book, a sci-fi omnibus from a few years ago. It starts off as kind of a romantic, kind of a melodrama, very kind of erotic, but then it kind of switches gears completely, and it's very surprising and very well made. And the other world premiere is Cart, which is again kind of a social drama about middle-aged women who are sacked at their temporary jobs at a large supermarket, and they go on strike. And so it's kind of based on a real story. It's very timely. The ensemble cast with this kind of a female-driven cast is very, very strong. It's directed by woman Boo Ji-young, who previously made kind of very indie films, and I thought it was quite powerful, and so a good social drama.
And you said there are going to be 14 movies, Korean films altogether, 8 in the program.
That's
so
right.
what about the rest, the 6 other movies?
So the other 6, I forgot to mention Confession is another film in City to City Seoul. International premiere at Toronto, but it actually already screened in Korea. It was a huge failure here, but it's actually really, really good. But moving on to the other films, we have the Masters section features the new films by Hong Sang-soo and Im Kwon-taek. Hong Sang-soo's Hill of Freedom, his shortest film is 67 minutes. I think I spoke about it a few weeks ago. Not his best, if I might say, but still good if you like his films. And then Im Kwon-taek, his 102nd film, Revivre, and quite a good film there. Those were both at Venice. And then there's Haemu, which is having its gala presentation at Toronto, produced by Bong Joon-ho, directed by Shim Sung-bo, who wrote Memories of Murder. It's really, really good. It didn't catch on fire here in Korea, but it's already doing very well on the international circuit. Toronto, San Sebastian. it's going to be at a lot of other festivals as well.
So all in all, what would you recommend the most? I guess I'm including all the films that are featured in the Toronto International Festival.
Briefly from what I've seen, which of course includes mostly the Korean films,
Right.
I would certainly say Haemu, I would say A Girl at My Door.
You mentioned that a couple of times,
Yeah,
that you're a big fan of
I'll keep
Haemu.
talking about it for a while. Anything with Bong Joon-ho attached, I'm a total fanboy. But in terms of films that I'm really curious to check out, because these are brand new, so I haven't had a chance to see a lot of them. There's the film Nightcrawler, which stars Jake Gyllenhaal. It kind of deals with media and the press. It's kind of like, there's a film called Network in the 70s. People are comparing it to that, and that's a real big classic. So I'm very curious to see that one. One director who I've not really warmed to in the past is Kevin Smith, but his new film, Tusk, is supposed to be very, very good. It stars Justin Long as someone who ends up going to someone's house in Canada, and this person takes him hostage and tries to turn him into a walrus. So it's very interesting, but the reviews have been very strong. There's a smaller film called Spring, which is by directors called Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. And they made a film called Resolution, which I really liked from a few years ago, though it's very small. And I met these guys at PFAN a few years ago, and they have this incredible energy. And this new film is getting really strong reviews, and I can't wait to see it.
Okay, all right. A lot going on in Toronto there.
Too much.
Well, yeah. Thank you very much, Pierce, for coming in today.
My pleasure.
Thanks. And now that brings you to the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching. I'll be back with more at 4 p.m. Korea time.